All right, how's it going, ladies and gentlemen? My video I'm bringing you today, I'm going to be discussing Cliff Note version of the patch notes as it pertains to PvP. As you guys know, on Monday, I read through the patch notes. It's an hour and 15-minute video. I wanted to condense it for those of you that don't want to read it and you don't want to watch the video. It's just, how does it affect me? And so I'm going to dive into the classes that got impacted the most. I'm going to dive into every class and basically say what they did. In my opinion, I'm going to dive into the light and medium changes, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the gear sets. And so, depending on what you want, it'll go in that order. So, in my opinion, the class that was most buffed by these initial changes. Oh, and keep in mind, guys, this is just the first week of the patch notes. Like, the sky isn't falling. Things are subject to change. Like, I understand. And when we get into that specific class, there are a lot of things that are not good right now. And so I totally get it. But, hopefully I can help you guys see more than just that one thing that I think is going to get changed anyways. So, with all that being said, let's dive into it. The class that was most positively buffed, in my opinion, was Templar. Stamina and Magic Templar. They did a lot of changes for both classes. The class itself got pretty major buffs. And honestly, it's not, I don't think any of them are really game breaking. It just coincides, builds better together. So Piercing Javelin is a stamina morph of, you throw your javelin at him. Instead of knocking him back like 8 meters and putting him out of range, it now just knocks him down. And so hopefully this accomplishes two things. Number one, you don't get that stupid roll dodge animation when you're trying to CC break a javelin. And number two, when a Templar sees you, you're still in front of them so they can hit you with an ult. They can still hit you with their jabs, whatever. Speaking of jabs, they also buffed jabs by 8%. Jabs and sweeps. So they increased the damage of the spammable by a little bit. Honestly, take it or leave it. It's 8%, not a big deal, but I think it's fine. Radial Sweep was a big change as well. They switched the morphs. And so the one that does damage now goes to the magic classes. The one that makes you more tanky goes to stamina classes. And I think this is a great change for basically two reasons. Number one, stamina classes already have access to a cheap ultimate that hits a bunch of people, and that's Dawnbreaker. So they didn't need Crescent Sweep. Magic Templars needed a cheap ultimate. Every other class, just about every other class, has a cheap class ultimate that does damage. Nightblades have, obviously, Soul Harvest or Incapacitating Strike. Sorcerers have, Atronach, Negate, Overload, like all those. And then on top of that, they can still run Dawnbreaker. You have Wardens that can run the Bear. Their Permafrost is expensive, but they get crazy ulti gens. So even though it's expensive, it's not that expensive because it's Warden. And Dragon Knights have Leap. And so everybody else has a cheap ultimate or a useful damage-dealing ultimate in their class skill line. Templars didn't have that, so they were forced to use Meteor, which they couldn't. They don't have an unblockable CC, and so they couldn't guarantee a Meteor hitting. Destrolt's expensive. Dawnbreaker is a physical morph, so it doesn't scale properly. And so I thought this change was great for Magic Templars. Does it make them overpowered? No. In my opinion, no. It's just now they have another tool that they can run. So now Nightblades can run Dawnbreaker in cap. They can run Crescent Sweep or Soul Assault or whatever. They just have another tool that they can equip. And I think that's very useful. On top, they did some PvE stuff, but the other big changes is they buffed Repentance. So now, more than one Templar can run in a group together, and they can run Repentance and get the buff, which means they can stack more damage in PvP. And the Rune Focus morph, Restoring Focus. So they have Channeled Focus, which gives a Magicka return. It turns out to like 480 Magicka recovery. Restoring Focus is now the Stamina return. And so with these two changes, Templars got really big Stamina return buffs, which will once again allow them to stack more into damage. And so I don't know if they needed both of them per se, and obviously it's subject to change, but I felt like one or the other was good. Stamina Sorks have Dark Deal. They still have Dark Deal even though it was nerfed. More about that in a bit. Nightblades have Siphoning. Dragon Knights have Battle Roar. Nightblades have Stam Recovery built in their passive skill line, and they have Siphoning attacks, and they have Merciless Resolve. So they have all these buffs to get recovery. And Wardens or Templars didn't really have it. And so I like this change. I think this change is good. Like either one of these is good. So I feel like this class got buffed quite a bit. The other buff that I really like, that's kind of going hidden, I think. If you're locked in a trap or talons or snared or whatever, your character will now always orient in the direction of the area of effect towards your reticle. This allows you to turn and damage enemies with these abilities while you're rooted. So no longer will a Magicka Dragon Knight just be able to stay behind you and beat on you, and you purify, and then they put talons on, and then you purify, and they put talons on, and all of a sudden you don't have magic anymore because you're a Stamplar, and they lock you down and they just beat you up. Now you can turn and you can dish damage back out. I like this change. I think this is very, very useful. Class that got the second most buffs, in my opinion, is Warden. They increased the resources returned on Betting Etch by 60%. They lowered the cost of Scorch by 25%. They allowed, and this one I do agree with, Wardens in general have a bunch of buffs. And so it's a big pain in the ass to rotate through all the buffs that Wardens have. So making it a little bit more user-friendly is nice. And so allowing Bird of Prey and Deceptive Predator to give you those buffs while slotted is a lot better than just constantly equipping it to give you Major Berserk or, your evasion or whatever. I like that change. But in my opinion, Stamina Warden really didn't need improvements. Honestly, I'm a little worried that Stamina Warden is going to get hit with the nerf hammer kind of hard in the near future because they keep giving them this stuff. And they're going to, they just didn't need this. So they're not huge changes, but it's still like Stam Warden's one of the strongest classes in the game. Why did you give him more? That's basically the gist of it. Magicka Warden I would have loved to see more love given to, but they increased the cost of Swarm by 30%. So Magicka Wardens don't get to do damage yet, basically. They did that, and they got rid of the Feral Guardian. Magicka Warden isn't super easy to play in PvP. It would be nice if they gave them some love, in my opinion. Next class, Nightblade. Nightblade got buffs by getting nerfed. And this is going to sound silly, but let me explain. This Piercing Mark nerf to the class is a buff to 1vx builds and small scale builds. Typically people running Mark, and I'm using broad generalizations, which isn't normally a good thing, but more often than not, the people that I find using Piercing Mark are people running in groups trying to take out Nightblades running solo or in small groups. And so nerfing the detection from 30 seconds to 5 seconds is a huge buff for small scale Nightblades. It's a nerf to the class, but it's a buff to small scale builds, because typically the small scale builds don't run Mark because they have to run other stuff to fight a bunch of people. So I think that's a buff specifically for my builds. Grim Focus, in my opinion, is a buff. This fully charged heavy attack, now granting 2 stacks towards your Spectral Bow, is really nice. So now Stam builds and Magicka Nightblades from stealth, when they charge their full heavy, it activates part of their heavy burst combo. So it'll be easier to get to your Spectral Bow when you open and start a fight. That's another buff. Obviously, it's no longer free and it costs half the amount of regular Grim Focus. I don't think that's a big deal, guys. I don't think that's enough of a nerf to outweigh these 2 buffs to the class. So that's just my opinion. Convince me otherwise if I'm wrong. I'm more than happy to admit I'm wrong, but I think those 2 changes are very nice, and it makes up for that. The other ones, they increased Drain Power, or Sap Essence, the damage by 25%. Bomb builds will be hitting a decent amount harder. They nerfed Funnel Health. So now when you're choosing between Swallow Soul and Funnel Health, you choose the bigger healing ability or the more damage dealing ability, which I thought was good. Siphoning Strikes, fully charged heavy attacks now restore twice the amount of health and resources for this ability and its morph. So I feel like Nightblade's got a lot of buffs. And once again, Why? Like, the class is strong. Like, I play Nightblade quite a bit. I like it. Like, I like these changes, but you didn't have to do them. Like, you didn't have to get rid of... Piercing Mark, in my opinion, is almost useless now. It was an anti-Nightblade skill, and now you just made it, Major Fracture. Major Fracture you already get with Surprise Attack. So, okay, whatever. This is a nice change. I think this just makes the game more fluid. But yeah, I don't know why they did those things. I think they think this is going to be more for like Nightblade tanks, but they don't realize that this is just so nice for PvP Nightblade builds. So yeah. Anyway, moving on. Dragonite. Dragonite didn't really see a whole lot of anything, in my opinion. They got a bunch of small stuff. They moved a bunch of things around. Basically, the gist is they got rid of the stun on Power Lash, which I think is kind of a buff for the class anyways. I don't want that. Like, I want to be able to CC and get off a burst combo. I don't want them to have CC immunity because I hit with a Power Lash and it stunned them and put them on the ground, and now I have to wait for 5 seconds to kill them. It just doesn't work well together, so it was good that they removed it. Power Lash also got increased cost, so now costs half the amount of the regular Flame Lash. That's a pretty substantial change, especially for PvE builds. PvP, not so much. Like, depends on the fight. Like, some fights it's going to be very noticeable. A lot of fights where you're just running around, like, you very rarely get Power Lashes off. Like, more often than not, people are out of your talons and stuff before you can really do it. But yeah, this... You'll notice this in a few fights, and that is a nerf. A lot of this is PvE related. They increased the healing done on Ash Cloud. Decrease the shield strength of Obsidian Shield by 1%. Like, it just... They didn't do a whole lot with the DK, but at the same time, I don't feel like they needed to do a whole lot from a PvP perspective. PvE... Maybe they could have gotten a little more love. And finally, let's discuss Sorcerer. We all know it. We all have a friend that's a Sorc. We all have a friend that's playing a Sorc for a long time. They're not happy. They're not happy for a good reason. They hit Sorc hard this patch, guys. And a lot of the nerfs, it's like, and I'm speaking in general, as a generalization again, but which is bad. But I think... And if I'm wrong, sorcerers, please chime in. But I feel like if they nerfed like one or two of the things they did, Sorcs would be like, okay, fine, whatever. Like, I get it. Like we have a couple things. Maybe it's overperforming. I could see that maybe this needs to be changed. But they hit them really hard. Dark Exchange, Dark Deal and Dark Conversion now only give you half the resources back immediately, and then it turns into the recovery for 20 seconds. And so... Now Stamp Sorcs can't stack crazy amounts of damage like they used to, and then hit Streak, Line of Sight, and get all their stuff off, or hit Undo, and then hit Dark Exchange 2 or 3 times to get back to full resources. I understand how that may have been overperforming, and once again, this is one of those things where it's like, if it stands alone, fine. I think that makes some sense. Rune Prison... I don't even count, this technically is a nerf. I don't even count it as a nerf. Like, you should be able to see a CC coming in so that you know to dodge it. And so it just makes sense that this happens. That now there's going to be a reticle that allows you to dodge roll if you want. I don't think it's that big of a deal. Like, you should be able to counter stuff. It is going to be a nerf to Sorcs, but, they're getting buffs in other ways, and I'll discuss that in a minute. Increase the damage done if the target fails to use Break Free before the stun ends by approximately 22%. So that's one of the buffs. Some of this stuff's PvP related. Let's get to the bad ones. Overload. Overload is a very big nerf. Now you can't run 3 skill bars. And so this kind of eliminates the buff bitch negate tank build, in some ways. Now you're going to have people run different aspects of that, because you can't just throw all that stuff and have a utility build, have it all in the bar. And so once again, this is one of those, if it stood by itself, maybe not that big of a deal, but when you combine that with Dark Conversion or Dark Deal, it's now adding up. And so They decrease the light attack damage. I think that makes sense. I mean, I'm sure everybody's seen how strong Overload hits people from a gank build. But yeah, I mean, they took away a very cool thing that Sorks had, which was having another skill bar. And I've always made the joke, when I play Sork, it's like, as a Sork, you don't really have to choose which skills to put on your bar because you have 3 freaking bars and you can just put them all on there. So once again, like I said, I can see the point of getting rid of this, but they did this and they did the original one that I talked to you about, and they made Conjured Ward a 1-second cast time. And this has been harped on all over the place. I'm just going to dive into it really quick. Having a main defense ability be interruptible is bullshit. Like, imagine if Breath of Life, you could be bashed out of it. Stamina builds, imagine if you could get bashed out of Vigor. That sort of thing should not happen. I agree that in some ways, shields are overperforming and they could use a nerf. But making it slow and clunky and tough to play and very, it's not fast gameplay to put a cast time on something. You could have, in my opinion, they could have nerfed it other ways. And making shields critable, that's great. But now it also scales off resistances, so it's not as big of a nerf as it once was, which is probably good, because you can get some pretty nasty burst combos with crit. And so you're going to get hit a little bit harder with wearing wards. But the 1-second duration on cast times is absolute bullshit, and they've already recognized that, and I wanted to post that for you guys here now. This is posted today. They say right here, however, we agree Conjured Ward and Annulment are too easy to interrupt in PvP, so we'll be making both spells immune to interrupts for PTS too. So next week, these 2 things will be uninterruptible. Though they still want the cast time. Apparently they want you to choose, it's 1 second. Well, let's see how it plays out. But you won't be able to bash people out of it, which is my biggest issue with it. We'll have to see if it's enough. But they took the feedback. They understand how ridiculously broken it is to be able to bash a shield. I run 3 light armor builds. I totally understand. Yeah, so it looks like they're going to look at it, and hopefully they bring it back to something that doesn't make it slow and clunky and uncompetitive. Because I want every class to be competitive. So we'll see how it goes. We'll see what happens. I don't think this is going to be. I think at the end of the day, this won't be a big deal. Whatever the change is going to be, it's not going to be what this is. So we can take a step back off the ledge. Now, that's the classes that have been impacted most in week 1. Kind of going off a slightly different topic, but instead of talking about classes, I want to talk about gear, and I want to talk about the direction of PvP and what it seems like they're doing. So a while back, they nerfed the damage in PvP by 50%. People were hitting too hard. They didn't like that anymore, so they nerfed the damage a lot. It was low. They brought it back up. It was low. They brought it back up. I think, once again, it's getting too high. And sorry. I want to talk about light armor first. They obviously, Annulment and Conjured Ward could be deal breakers. They could make those builds completely broken and unable to play. But if they don't, and they bring it back to something that we all think that they will, because I don't think it's going to make it that far. They already admitted that it's an issue. Light armor got a pretty nice buff this patch. They increased the amount of recovery per piece of light armor by 2%. So now you're going to have 10% more recovery wearing 5 light. That's the same buff as being a high elf or being a vampire. 10% is a lot. 10% recovery is a lot. And so what this allows you to do, stack more max magicka, stack more damage, have the same amount of recovery. You're going to hit harder next patch with your same build, with your same recovery, because you have more recovery in light armor passively. This is a very nice change. They increased the duration of your damage shield to 9 seconds. That'll also be nice. The other thing is they now gave you reduce snare effectiveness wearing light armor up to 4% per piece, which isn't a ton, but it's nice. Having 20%, they're lowering the duration of snares, and now you get some snare removal. And so up to 20%, I think that's a very nice improvement as well. I think that's the biggest problem with playing light armor right now is you get run down by people wearing swift traits and you get snared into place and you can't really get out of it. This is going to allow you to get, both these things are going to allow you to get out of it a little bit more and potentially hit a little bit harder. Those are big changes. The other thing they did to light armor that, we're slowly seeing is they keep coming out with very high damage Magicka sets, very functional high damage sets. And it's fine. Like both classes, both Stam and Magicka have it, but I feel like we're at a very nice ground for damage, but then you come out with Balorgh and you come out with some of these sets that they have now, and it's like, okay, people are probably hitting a little too hard. And it's just more of that in the same direction. More Magicka this patch than Stamina. But they gave them this, Bright Throat's Boast. It's Magicka Bone Pirates. Max Magicka. When you have a drink buff active, your max magic is increased by 2,000 and magic recovery by 150. So you get really good max Magicka, which stacks in your awards, which also gives you good recovery. And you're going to hit pretty hard. Like this is a very good set, guys. This is very, very good. And it works so well in light armor builds, obviously. Obviously, Stamina. They got some good sets, and I'll discuss them in a minute. But that set's very nice. And this set, it's just stuff like this. They just keep constantly upping the damage. And eventually, they're going to have to scale it back. And when you look at this, max Magicka spell damage. When you deal damage with a light attack, you place a mark over your target for 5 seconds, granting you 500 spell damage against your marked target. This effect can occur every 4 seconds. So if you look at the set and you compare it to a set like Burning Spellweave is like 535 spell damage, maybe 550, whatever, for the 5-piece. But it's max Magicka spell damage and crit. This gives you more flat damage for the 2, 3, and 4-piece, and you have 100% uptime with this set compared to Burning Spellweave. You can have up to 100% uptime. It's not going to be 100%, but it lasts for 5 seconds. It can occur every 4 seconds. And this works so well with staff builds. You're already buffing your Berserk enchant on your back bar every 4 to 6 seconds anyways. And so now that light attack is just going to give you 500 spell damage. You switch bars, you light attack with your front bar, you can proc and have 500 spell damage. And so, my point is light armor got fucked by the harness changes, by the Conjured Ward changes. But if we can get past that, they got big buffs in the gear that they can wear and passively for the light armor skills. So, I know a lot of Sorks are upset. I've seen it in the forums. I have a few friends that are honestly talking about quitting the game. Just see how it plays out. See how those other things play out because, these things are going to make your build better if those other things are manageable. So they got nerfs in one direction, but they got buffs in the other. And so it's not nearly as bad as it looks, in my opinion. Now, medium armor. Medium armor, I don't know what to make of without testing. In some ways, as you guys know, they increased the weapon damage bonus to 15% from 12%. That's nice. You're going to hit a little bit harder in medium armor. The other thing they did is major evasion. Now you get 25% damage mitigation for AoEs instead of just flat dodging an attack sometimes. And so, in my opinion, this is another way that kind of buffs Sork builds because if you've played Sork, running across a medium armor build, sometimes they just dodge your crystal frag, and there's not much you can do about it. They dodge roll, and for it seems like 6 to 20 seconds, they just dodge all frags after one dodge roll, and you're like, well, what's going on here? They tighten that window, so you can't dodge roll. Like, the frag has to be incoming for you to dodge roll and for it to miss, and now you can't passively have a missed frag. It's always going to hit. And Crystal Frags are a single target ability. Major Evasion only stops AoEs. So for a Sork, it is going to nerf your Meteor. It is going to nerf your Curse. It's not going to nerf your Crystal Frag. It's not going to nerf your Force Pulse. It's not going to nerf your light attacks with your Destro Staff. And you're going to put more pressure on medium armor builds because you have all these single target abilities. So same thing with Nightblades. Nightblades are going to be able to do the same thing to medium armor. Everybody's going to be able to, that run single target skills are going to be able to do it. The AoE bomb builds, you know, people running Destro Ult, Caltrop, Steel Tornado, Dawnbreaker, most ults are AoEs. You know, those sorts of builds, they're going to have up to 25% damage mitigation against those. So that Dawnbreaker, Steel Tornado combo that's nasty right now, if you're wearing medium armor, it's not going to be as nasty. It's just not. And so medium armor, I think, is going to be very prevalent in ball groups. I can see a lot of people running medium armor because you get all this AoE damage mitigation. Stam Wardens and all these Stam classes are already really good for ball grouping, but now you just get flat 25% against Destro Ult, against Steel Tornado, against all this other stuff. It just seems to make a lot of sense. So, and you hit a little harder, so you're going to be more bursty. So, I don't know. I think some classes, I think this is going to come down to a build. I think it's going to come down to who you're playing against. But I kind of like it, guys. You know, I don't like Shuffle just randomly stopping somebody from dying. You can dodge single target attacks. You can block single target attacks. And now the ones you can't dodge or block, you have damage mitigation against. So, kind of like it. Like, I kind of like the change overall. But obviously, there's a few medium armor sets that are also good. This will be the last thing I talk about. That none of them are as good as the Magicka ones. There's going to be a few combinations that I will be using. There's one set that I think might be pretty freaking strong. I have to get to it here. I remember where it's at. This one, Soldier of Anguish. Negating health or healing for 4 seconds up to 5,500 points is a lot. And 25% chance is a very high proc rate, especially if you're a Templar. And so all those buffs I was talking about with Templar or Stamplar, this is an amazing set. I'm telling you right now, this is, if this goes unchanged, this will be on my Stamplar build. And it's going to be pretty effective. Yeah, like just negating healing like that. It's a cool idea, but I think they probably need to lower the proc chance, especially considering each individual biting jab counts as a melee chance. So you're literally going to be able to proc this all the time as a Stamplar. It's going to be good on other Stam classes as well. But yeah, most of the stuff they did for Stam classes, one of the sets is what Magicka classes have already. You get Ulti-Gen. It's kind of like Shock. You know, when you're in combat, you gain Minor Heroism, so it's 1.5 ult. The other one that they did, there's a lot of good utility stamina sets, but they don't have. They already have high damage sets like Clever Alchemist, like Fury, like 7th Legion, like there's 2 others out there, well, like 4 others. Stamina already has a bunch of high damage sets, so they gave them a bunch of utility ones this patch. And a lot of them are pretty interesting. So a couple of them are going to make it onto a few of my builds. That one definitely will. I think that one, I'm going to test it to see if I think it needs a nerf, but it's something that should be looked at. Anyway, that's going to be the end of this video. Let me know what you guys think. Hopefully I explained myself pretty well. Hopefully I talked some of you Sorks off the edge, at least for a couple of weeks until you see how it kind of shakes out. But yeah, that's what I think. What do you think? Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.